Be me, lead systems architect at Apex Data Flow Systems, a company nobody's ever heard of, but whose software touches everything from your online banking to the water supply management in mid-sized cities. My domain is the distributed automation workflow, the invisible nervous system connecting critical data points. I manage the core orchestrators, the servers that don't just hold data, but actively move it, transform it, and ensure its integrity. It's a job requiring precision, an unwavering adherence to protocol, and an iron will when dealing with human idiocy. Mostly the last one. Be not me, Blake Sterling, Executive Vice President of Digital Transformation, freshly poached from a failing startup known for its disruptive, broken, blockchain-enabled pet tracking app. He arrived 6 months ago, oozing slick confidence, expensive cologne, and an unshakable belief that he knew more about our infrastructure than the people who built it. His primary credential seemed to be his golf handicap and a habit of referring to established security protocols as legacy bottlenecks. The first red flag fluttered during his second week. He stormed into my server room, a place typically restricted to authorized personnel and the occasional facilities technician, dressed in a tailored suit and polished loafers. He wanted full administrator credentials to the primary Apex Data Flow orchestrator, the central nervous system of our client data transfers. He said he needed to personally review and optimize the system's performance, citing a vague metric he'd pulled from a Gartner report he didn't quite understand. I stood between him and the server rack, my arms crossed. Politely, I explained that per corporate security protocol, Section 3.14, direct administrative access to production systems required a documented change request, peer review, and a minimum 48-hour approval window. This was non-negotiable. His eyes narrowed. He declared my adherence to policy was stifling innovation. I countered that data integrity and client trust were paramount. He huffed, clearly unaccustomed to being told no, and stomped out, but I noticed him attempting to peer over my shoulder at the console display. A quiet alarm bell rang in my head. A month later, the escalation continued. Blake was pushing to integrate a new, AI-driven analytics dashboard he'd commissioned from a tiny, unknown vendor he met at a conference. He handed me a USB drive, a generic silver stick, insisting it contained the pre-alpha build. He wanted me to just install it on a dev server, get it running. We can worry about procurement later. He waved away my concerns about vetting, security audits, and the vendor's financial stability, stating it was too important to get bogged down in bureaucratic red tape. I looked at the unsealed, generic USB drive in my hand, then at Blake's expectant face. My internal monologue was screaming. Our third-party integration policy, Section 2.21, explicitly forbade deploying unvetted software, especially from unknown sources, onto any company hardware, development, or production. The risks of malware, backdoors, or simple instability were immense. I returned the drive. I explained, calmly but firmly, that the process required a full security review, a legal contract, and proper licensing. He exploded. "Are you actively trying to sabotage my initiatives?" he demanded, his voice echoing through the open plan office. "I am upholding company policy," I replied, unflustered. He called me an obstructionist and promised to go over my head. I just nodded. Every interaction, every refusal, every one of his baseless accusations was meticulously logged in my personal, encrypted system. Screenshots, time-stamped emails, audio recordings if permissible, were all part of my daily ritual. The third, and most telling, incident happened during a weekly operations meeting. Blake unveiled a plan to migrate all legacy client data, including sensitive, personally identifiable information and financial records, to a new cloud platform he'd championed. The migration tool he proposed was an open-source script he'd found on GitHub. He presented it with a flourish, as if discovering fire. He wanted my team to perform the migration that weekend, bypassing our standard data migration protocols, which involved extensive testing, validation, and a phased rollout over several weeks. He wanted me to sign off on the immediate execution. My face remained impassive. I listened to his spiel, the buzzwords flowing like cheap champagne. When he finished, I opened my laptop and projected our data lifecycle management and transfer policy. specifically sections 4.3 and 4.4, covering risk assessment and rollback procedures. I highlighted the liabilities involved in an unvetted tool, the potential for data corruption, loss, and the severe legal penalties for mishandling PII. I reiterated that signing off on such a plan without adhering to protocol would be a direct violation of my fiduciary duties and grounds for immediate termination. Blake turned purple. "I am your executive vice president. You will comply," he thundered. I responded, "My compliance is conditional on adherence to company policy, Mr. Sterling. The alternative is corporate suicide." The meeting ended abruptly, Blake slamming his fist on the table and storming out. The writing was on the wall. He couldn't go through me. He'd have to go around me. I knew it was only a matter of time. The breaking point arrived 2 weeks later. It was a Tuesday, a day usually marked by routine maintenance windows and internal team syncs. I was deep in a critical architectural review meeting for a new client onboarding, a session that was scheduled for 4 hours and took me completely offline. Blake, it later transpired, had taken advantage of my absence. He had been quietly lobbying our CTO, a man who, while technically savvy, was also deeply susceptible to C-suite peer pressure, for temporary elevated access to resolve a critical UI display bug on the Apex Dataflow Orchestrator's internal dashboard. This was a completely trivial cosmetic issue, one I had already triaged and scheduled for a non-urgent patch release next quarter. Blake, however, had fixated on it, claiming it reflected poorly on his digital transformation efforts. With this coarse temporary access, obtained by framing the issue as an urgent visual defect impeding executive review, Blake entered the main server room. He bypassed the usual security protocols, ignoring the authorized personnel only, signs, and the requirement for a verified companion. Our server room's access logs later confirmed his entry at 10:17 a.m. He was alone. What he did next was meticulously documented by the server's own internal logging mechanisms. At 10:25 a.m., he inserted his personal, unvetted, generic silver USB drive directly into a primary USB port on the front panel of the Apex Dataflow Orchestrator, the very machine I had refused to grant him full administrator access to months prior. He navigated to the drive. He then executed a script he believed was his hotfix for the visual bug. In reality, that USB drive, likely picked up from a freebie table at some dubious conference or perhaps already infected from his home network, contained a sophisticated piece of malware. This malware, masquerading as a display patch, immediately launched a multi-stage attack. It exploited a known, but previously patched, SQL injection vulnerability within our data transfer framework. This vulnerability, which my team had carefully mitigated months ago, was re-exposed by Blake's fix, which somehow rolled back a critical security update or injected a malicious library that circumvented the patch. Simultaneously, the malware established a persistent backdoor and began systematically exfiltrating client PII and financial transaction data to an external, untraceable server. At 11:32 a.m., my phone buzzed with a series of frantic alerts. Critical system integrity failures, unprecedented data transfer rates to unauthorized external, alarms that hadn't triggered in years or ever. My meeting abruptly ended. I sprinted to the server room. Blake was still there, wiping sweat from his brow, a look of bewildered panic on his face as the orchestrator's console blared red warnings. He saw me, and his eyes lit up with accusation. "Your systems are compromised," he shrieked, pointing at the blinking lights. "You failed to secure this server." I said nothing. My mind was already in read-only mode. The trap had been set weeks ago, unknowingly by him, meticulously by me. My master plan, born from Blake's initial acts of arrogant ignorance, was simple. Document everything, refuse nothing that could be used against him, and ensure my own hands were impeccably clean. Every single interaction, every policy violation he pushed for, every warning I issued, was filed away. I had an encrypted folder on my secure network drive, mirrored off-site, containing a chronological narrative of Blake Sterling's entire tenure. It was an executive audit trail, a forensic record of incompetence. The core of my strategy revolved around our corporate security protocol handbook, a dense document few people outside my department ever read. Specifically, sections 1.25, executive override procedures, and 7.13, unauthorized system modification. Section 1.25 outlined a convoluted, rarely used process by which a C-suite executive could technically bypass standard change control for extreme, exigent circumstances, if and only if they personally signed a waiver assuming all legal and financial responsibility for any ensuing damages, and notified a minimum of 3 specific board members in writing. Blake had never signed such a waiver. He had simply intimidated the CTO into giving him temporary access, implicitly violating 1.25. My documentation would prove he acted outside this narrow exemption. Section 7.13 was even more damning. Any unauthorized modification or deployment of unvetted software onto production systems by any personnel, regardless of rank, will be considered gross negligence and grounds for immediate termination and potential criminal charges. This section, rarely invoked, was my nuclear option. I had logged every instance where Blake pushed for unvetted software or direct access, ensuring my warnings about 7.13 were clearly articulated in meeting minutes and emails. When he bypassed me and plugged in his USB drive, he stepped directly into this trap. My final, malicious compliance was to ensure his access was logged, his actions were logged, and my warnings were logged. But I did not physically prevent him from doing something that was technically possible with his temporary credentials, knowing the internal logging would incriminate him fully. The server's event logs, USB port activity logs, and the specific malware signature identification were my irrefutable witnesses. The chaos that followed was spectacular. As the system screamed warnings and my team began the emergency shutdown and containment protocols, Blake was still shouting accusations. "This is your incompetence, your negligence. You were supposed to secure this environment." His face was a mask of furious desperation. I walked over to him, calm as a lake in winter. "Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice quiet but cutting through the noise, "you are mistaken. This is your doing," he spluttered. "What? How dare you? I was just implementing a fix." "A fix, Mr. Sterling," I continued. "That was sourced from an unvetted personal device, installed directly into a production server without following any change control, security review, or documented executive override procedure." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. "Your personal USB drive, sir. Inserted at 10:25 a.m. today. Our system logs capture everything, including the immediate spike in outbound data and the deployment of a known SQL injection exploit. The fix was a Trojan." His jaw dropped. He looked like a fish out of water. That's impossible," he stammered, visibly paling. "Is it?" I reached into my bag and pulled out a slim, innocuous-looking binder. Not the full dossier, just the highlights. "Here are the timestamps of my explicit warnings against unvetted software. Here are the meeting minutes where you demanded direct access. And here, I opened the binder to a specific page, a printout from the server's forensic log. Is the specific log entry of your USB drive being mounted, and the subsequent malicious script execution." I pointed to the glowing red alerts on the server screen. "The system is currently exfiltrating millions of client records, Mr. Sterling. Personally identifiable information, financial data, the works. This isn't my failure to secure the system. This is your failure to respect it." The fallout was immediate and brutal. Within hours, the entire floor was swarming with corporate security, forensic analysts, and then, ominously, plainclothes investigators. The data breach was catastrophic. Apex Data Flow Systems was facing class action lawsuits, regulatory fines in the tens of millions, and a complete loss of client trust. The CEO, a man usually insulated by layers of middle management, personally descended into the server room, his face a thundercloud. Blake Sterling was escorted out of the building by 2 grim-faced security personnel, his golf clubs still propped against his office wall, unplayed. His termination was effective immediately, for cause, without severance. The company's press release was a masterpiece of corporate damage control, attributing the incident to a rogue actor who willfully bypassed established security protocols. They didn't name Blake, but everyone knew. Legal proceedings against him for gross negligence, corporate malfeasance, and potentially even criminal charges related to data privacy violations were already in motion. His digital transformation had indeed transformed everything, just not in the way he intended. Update 3 weeks later. The dust is still settling at Apex, or rather, it's raining lawyers and auditors. My team and I are working around the clock to rebuild, resecure, and reassure clients. The good news is, my meticulous documentation paid off spectacularly. My actions were hailed as exemplary. I am now the interim CTO, and my department is getting a blank check for security upgrades. Blake, last I heard, he's facing a barrage of personal lawsuits from angry clients and shareholders, alongside the company's own suit against him for indemnification. He's already sold his expensive car. Update 2, 2 months passed. The company has officially recovered, though our reputation took a significant hit. We're stronger now, leaner, and our security protocols are legendary. The Blake Sterling Protocol is now mandatory for any executive interaction with it. It involves mandatory security awareness training, a sworn declaration of policy adherence, and a signed waiver acknowledging personal liability for any security breaches resulting from unauthorized actions. As for Blake, the legal system moves slowly, but inexorably. His assets are frozen, his professional reputation is utterly annihilated, and his personal life is reportedly a shambles. He tried to claim he was misunderstood in a desperate LinkedIn post. It was ratioed into oblivion. Update 3, 6 months on. Apex Data Flow Systems is thriving again, having weathered the storm. My promotion to permanent CTO was announced last week. The board explicitly cited my unwavering commitment to security and foresight in risk mitigation during the Sterling debacle. Blake Sterling, the once arrogant EVP, is now a footnote in corporate history, a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms. He recently pleaded guilty to several counts of corporate malfeasance to avoid jail time, effectively destroying any chance of a future career. He's reportedly working retail now, a fitting end for a man who always thought he was above the rules. Sometimes, the most satisfying victories are the ones you plan in silence, executing them with the cold precision of a well-coded automation script.